Hello, this is Dr. Moyer. This week we will be talking or focusing on evaluation models. There are some of them covered in the textbook for the class, but some of them are not, so you do want to plan on taking notes and paying attention. You probably should be doing that anyway, but you know what I mean. In your textbook, this chapter starts out by saying, preparation precedes production. And I think that if you keep that in mind, you'll be okay. Planning helps you to avoid making mistakes that will affect the quality of the evaluation, which in turn will then affect the outcome or the results of the evaluation. And it could skew the results. It could also result in you making recommendations that are not necessarily true or accurate because there were errors or skewed data. So before conducting an evaluation, evaluators need to become familiar with the program's purpose and goals, the program structure, the staff and the other personnel, the target audience for the program, how outcomes are measured and achieved, and the program's resources. We also need to be familiar with the stakeholders, but for the purposes of the evaluation, stakeholders shouldn't drive everything else. We just need to be aware of what their needs are. After this information is determined, the evaluator can begin assessing whether an evaluation can actually be completed. And this is all part of steps 1 through 4, which we discussed last week. And then they can look at what type of evaluation model to work with. However, I want to point out that most evaluators use combinations of evaluation models. They don't just identify one specific model. In the past, it was more common to rely on just one type of model, and the research has identified different types of models that have been used in the past, but again, today most evaluators use bits and pieces. No one model is necessarily better than another, it just depends on what is needed. The first model is called the traditional model. Basically, evaluators just did whatever they wanted, whatever they felt would be best. They conducted the evaluation however they saw fit, collected data in a way that they felt was best, and analyze the data in the way that they felt was best. There was no disciplined analysis, no steps were followed, and of course, as a result of this, it was often a biased evaluation, and sometimes even self-serving because people from the program itself, whether it be the manager, supervisor, program planner, or other staff, conducted the evaluation. So you can understand how that could be biased. They have a stake in seeing the program do well so that their job will still be there and the program will continue running. And that's not acceptable or as acceptable in today's society. Then the social science research model came along. This was designed to make evaluations more rigorous and control for the self-serving biases we just talked about with the traditional model. And evaluators, instead of just doing what they wanted, started to realize that there was validity to viewing program evaluation as a form of research. And the model looks specifically at the two groups, randomly assigned groups, the control and the treatment group, as well as the use of pre and post tests. And so then the two groups would be compared on pre and post tests to see which one had improved, and hopefully it was the treatment group. Unfortunately, the groups are often too small to have statistical power. We haven't talked a lot about statistical power, but it is an issue if you have a small subject group. And so what happens is if you don't have a large enough sample, there could be significant differences, but you won't find them because you don't have enough entries or people or subjects to boost the power of the analysis that you're using. So you could find false negatives. and you could find that the program isn't working when in fact, if other types of data collection had been used, you would find that it is working. So it introduced rigor, but maybe too much, and it's not always feasible to carry out. It can be very time consuming and expensive. And although what we do in this class is based upon the social science research model, we don't follow it exactly with the two groups in the pre and post tests, but we do use the scientific method as a guide. So that's how we're taking bits and pieces of this model. The industrial inspection model typically was used in manufacturing, and it is sometimes used still today. Involves inspecting a product at the end of a production line, and then if there's a problem with it, fixing it, and then putting it back into circulation to sell. This evaluation can be very costly because it's actually less expensive to identify the problem prior to it happening and then fix that rather than fixing all the products that have mistakes or problems with them. So it doesn't provide enough information to do prevention, which would be much more inexpensive, and manufacturers soon realized that and changed the way that they conducted evaluation based upon this information. However, you do still see this happening, particularly with very small companies, or even people making products in their home and selling them on the internet. Then we have the black box evaluation, which is similar to the industrial inspection model, but it's an evaluation that is designed, to examine the output of a program without looking at its internal structure. So during the evaluation itself, program planning, program structure, staff, goals, resources, etc. are not examined, only the outcomes are. And it's called black box because it's kind of, you can envision like putting a black box over all that information, you're just looking at the output. It is similar to the industrial inspection model because basically you're just looking at what's happening at the end of the production line. So did the behavior improve? Rather than looking at process and identifying where things can be improved prior to getting to that point. So very similar, but more common with social science programs than like in industry. An objectives-based evaluation concerns conducting an evaluation based upon the goals and objectives of the program. So did the program reach the goals and objectives established by the program planners, or the people that implemented the program, or the facilitators? And this is actually the most prevalent form of evaluation conducted even in today's society. And it's great for determining the validity of the program, but without looking at how or why programs succeed and fail, and without including unanticipated results, which can sometimes be very positive, they're not always negative, you miss the big picture. And it's not as easy to make suggestions or even to implement improvements when you don't have the big picture. So while it is very common, it's the most common type that's used today, you'll hear many people, we have to know what the goals and objectives are, and that's how we're going to determine whether or not the program was effective. Did it reach the goals? Well, some goals are not often included in the actual goals of the program. So you may have what's the word I'm looking for? Implicit goal of, let's say it's a drinking and driving program, and although you want to reduce drinking and driving and the goals are aimed at drinking and driving specifically, maybe you don't think about how the program could reduce drinking in general among the population you're looking at. That's one of the unanticipated effects that is actually positive, but because it isn't a goal, it isn't examined. I hope that makes sense. A goal-free evaluation is when the evaluator is the exact opposite. They're not told of the program goals and they conduct the evaluation without knowing what those are. It's one of the most thorough and revealing or accurate types of evaluation because the evaluator is never informed of what the goals are. They examine every aspect of the program, and it's really helpful when they're trying to identify where their problems are. But, you may be thinking, well, why doesn't everybody do this? Well, it's very expensive and it's very time consuming. Without knowing what the program goals are, you have to gather a lot more information and you have to spend more time analyzing that information. And so while it is an effective and accurate evaluation, it's not very feasible for most programs. And it is actually the most helpful, though, when you're implementing a new program, because you are looking so thoroughly at every aspect of it. A fiscal evaluation is just what it sounds like. It's a financial evaluation, basically to just verify that the money that's invested, usually by the major stakeholder, is being used effectively, or the primary stakeholder. This is not suitable for all programs, but programs that receive any form of government funding are often required to do this. And of course, the focus is on the return of investment. Is the money that's being invested or vetted out prior to the program implementation, is it actually panning out and reducing the problem and thus reducing the cost to society so it is a good investment? That might sound all well and fine, but you can't always just focus on the money. In some things, you don't see the return on investment until a long period of time has passed. So, for example, you may have a gambling program, anti-gambling program, that teaches adolescents about the dangers of gambling, and the outcomes that are being evaluated are, did the knowledge change in the immediate aftermath? Did the behavior change? Do they reduce their gambling behavior in the 6 months or the year after the program is completed? Well, it may not pan out that way, that it looks like that, but over the long haul, if they were to go back, if they could afford a longitudinal study or evaluation and go back and see how many of those adolescents that participated in the program actually ended up with some type of gambling problem or some of the outcomes associated with gambling, they might find that the return on investment is much higher than they expected, because people aren't having to serve in jails or prisons or even other types of court-ordered programs. So it's hard to focus on just money. It's important, and the government is always going to make programs do that, but there are other things that are important as well. The accountability model, this is where the evaluation is focused on compliance with regulations. And like the fiscal model, publicly funded programs have to complete these types. And it's just to verify that the federal government's money, or taxpayers' money, is providing the services that were intended. So is the money being used for what it was intended for? It's not so much a return on investment, but is that money actually being used for an anti-gambling program, or is most of it going to I don't know, I can't think of something else it would go to. Let's say like posters, just advertising that gambling's bad. Hopefully that makes sense. It's also concerned with whether or not regulations are being complied with. And this is important when it's a program on a sensitive topic or issue or problem. You have to be very careful about confidentiality, for example. So there may be an accountability model evaluation conducted to determine whether or not confidentiality is actually being respected and followed. Then there's the expert opinion model, and this is when an expert, or more than one, come in and examine a program, and it's often used when quantitative data is either unavailable or it's not suitable for evaluation. So you may have a very small program with only 5 participants, and running quantitative analysis with 5 participants is not going to be sufficient. So you might ask an expert to come in, an expert on the topic that the program deals with, and evaluate the program. They may do that by interviewing the participants and the staff, by conducting observation. They're more than likely going to use qualitative methodology, though. A naturalistic model also relies on qualitative methodology, and this is where the evaluator becomes the instrument themselves. And so they personally observe every aspect of the program, and they try not to interfere with the program in any way while doing so. So they would hold detailed conversations with all of the stakeholders. They would interview, observe. They may even interview, observe, what's the third one I'm looking for? Or hold a focus group with the clients and with the staff. They may do a document examination or review to include that type of data. But they're going to try not to interfere with the program in any way, but to observe every aspect and use themselves as the instrument to do that. And this is most useful when you're trying to gain a rich, deeper understanding of the program, or of the clients and the environment, in addition to the outcomes of the program. It can be helpful for any program, but particularly ones that are newly implemented. Then you have the empowerment model. The focus of this type of model is empowering the clientele. So this moves beyond just asking the clients how they felt about the program, did they learn anything, did their behavior change, etc. They're actively involved in the evaluation itself. Focus on empowerment when you're thinking about this kind of model. So as part of being actively involved, they're going to gain new skills and hopefully more confidence in themselves. So one of the ways that I see this carried out indirectly is a board of directors for a social service program may include former clients, and that may be written in their bylaws that it's important they have to do that. I know it's with a lot of domestic violence agencies that is done, and that's to make sure there's this accountability with having clients on the board of directors, but also because clients can provide very valuable information that others can't. And part of the board of directors' job or tasks is to evaluate the program, so clients are involved in that evaluation either directly or indirectly as a board member. They gain new skills, they become more confident in themselves, they realize that what they have to say is very valuable. So focus on empowerment. The theory-driven evaluation just looks at what current research or even theory says about the issue or the problem. What do researchers say that people that are affected by the problem or the issue, what do they need according to researchers? And so it may be the case that researchers have determined that if parents are more affectionate with their children, then they're less likely to do drugs. And they have determined this, of course, by collecting data in various ways throughout the years, applying theory, blah, blah, blah. But no one's ever actually created a program to determine if this is true. And so a program could be developed where parents are not only given the knowledge about how to be more affectionate, but also given the skills, taught how to do that. And then it's tested after to see if they are doing it. And then over the long term, are the students or the children of the parents less likely to do drugs? Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes it's called model testing or theory testing as well. And it's really when you need empirical data to show that a program actually works. So it's theorized that more affection will work, but does it actually really do that? The improvement focus model can be a little confusing sometimes because program improvement is the goal of all evaluations, regardless. We've talked about that before. But in this type of model, the evaluator's looking for discrepancies between what was planned and what actually happened. And so they're not just concerned with the outcomes or the resources or staffing, etc. They're concerned with finding those gaps, where those problems are, so that they can be fixed. And it's not to attack the program or make anyone feel bad. The purpose is for improvement, so they want to look to see where things are falling short and not doing what they're intending to do. Hopefully that makes sense. Kind of like an instrument's validity. Does it measure what it's actually intended to measure? But when there's an improvement-focused model, an evaluator is looking for those discrepancies and gaps so that then they can make recommendations for improvement, and those improvements can be implemented and the program improves. That concludes the evaluation models that you're responsible for knowing and understanding. You should know the differences between them and some of the pros and cons that we discussed. You should also be able to think critically about these models and go beyond what I just tell you here in the PowerPoint. Think about what the model is, what it's designed to do, and that will help you develop pros and cons for each of them. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just briefly going over the midterm exam since this is an online class and I don't see you face to face. I just wanted to give you an idea of what to expect. So I will post the exam on July 1st. I'm not positive of the time that I'll post it yet, so I'm not saying a time, but it will be posted by midnight, July 1st at the latest. It's due by midnight on July 7th. It'll be a mix of multiple choice, true, false, and short essay questions. You can use your notes, you can use the book, you can use the internet, you can use articles, you can use whatever you want, but you have to cite everything. That should go without saying in a graduate level class, but I just want to warn you that if you do not do within text citations in your answers and include a reference list, actually, that's not true. I'm not going to make you include a reference list because of this type of test. But you have to cite your sources within the text. So if you use a textbook to inform a question response, then you have to cite the textbook. And by doing that, you would just cite the authors and the year. If you're unfamiliar with how to do within text citations, you should refer to the OWL at Purdue, wonderful resource, or any other resource regarding APA formatting, because that's how I will be grading it. You can find the midterm under quizzes in D2L. It'll be timed. I'm not sure exactly. It depends on how long I make it. But I will put a news item up to announce when the quiz is available and how much time you will have and how many attempts that you will be allowed. Okay. That's all for this week. Good luck on your midterm, and I hope you have a good 4th of July.